Ambassador Zethkar had seen many species prepare for battle during his 2 centuries of diplomatic service. The proud Valorians with their ceremonial armor gleaming under twin suns. The methodical crystalline collective, their formations perfect as geometric art. The fierce razor-claw tribes, howling their ancient war songs that could shatter glass. But nothing had prepared him for this. The human staging ground stretched beyond the horizon, a sea of organized chaos that defied everything he thought he knew about military preparation. Millions of soldiers moved with purpose across the dusty plains of Kepler 442b, their olive-green uniforms blending into an endless tide of humanity. Zethkar adjusted his breathing apparatus and stepped closer to the observation platform's edge. His 4 eyes tracked the movement below, trying to understand the patterns. Unlike other species, the humans didn't march in perfect formation. They didn't chant war songs or display their weapons proudly. Instead, they moved with a quiet efficiency that made his scales prickle with unease. Fascinating, isn't it? The voice belonged to General Sarah Chen, the human military leader who had agreed to this unprecedented observation. She stood beside him, her hands clasped behind her back, watching her troops with what Zethkar had learned to recognize as pride. "I confess, General, I find your species' approach to warfare unusual," Zethkar replied, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into perfect English. "Where are the battle hymns? The ceremonial displays of strength?" General Chen smiled, and something in that expression made Zethkar's inner eyelids flutter nervously. "We save our energy for what matters, Ambassador. Would you like to see more?" She led him through the camp, past rows of prefabricated structures that had been erected with mechanical precision. Soldiers saluted as they passed, but there was no fanfare, no elaborate ritual, just respect, quick and efficient. They stopped at a medical tent where human doctors worked on wounded soldiers from a recent skirmish with hegemony forces. Zethkar watched in amazement as the medical staff treated not only human casualties, but also captured enemy combatants with the same level of care. "This is highly irregular," he observed. "Why waste resources on defeated enemies?" "Because they're people," a young medic replied without looking up from her patient, a badly injured hegemony warrior whose chitinous armor had been carefully removed. "Pain is pain, regardless of which side you're on." General Chen nodded approvingly. "That's lesson 1 about humans, Ambassador. We fight when we must, but we never forget our humanity." As they continued their tour, Zethkar noticed something else unusual. The humans weren't just preparing weapons and equipment. They were preparing themselves mentally. He saw soldiers writing letters, sharing photographs of families, and gathering in small groups to talk quietly among themselves. "What are they doing?" he asked, pointing to a circle of soldiers sitting around a small cooking fire. "They're sharing stories," General Chen explained, "about home, about why they're here, about what they're fighting for. It's an old tradition." Zethkar listened as one soldier spoke about his daughter's first steps, another about her grandmother's apple pie recipe, and a third about the view from his apartment window in Neo-Tokyo. These weren't the boasts of warriors eager for glory. They were reminders of what they were protecting. The scale of the human operation became clearer as they reached the command center. Holographic displays showed troop movements across 17 different worlds, supply lines stretching across multiple star systems, and communication networks that connected billions of humans across the galaxy. "Your logistics are impressive," Zethkar admitted. "But surely the hegemony's superior technology will prevail. Their plasma weapons, their shield technology." General Chen called up a tactical display. "Technology is important, Ambassador, but it's not everything. The hegemony has been expanding for 3 centuries, conquering species after species. They've grown accustomed to easy victories against civilizations that surrender when faced with superior firepower. And humans won't surrender? We can't," she said simply. "It's not in our nature." As evening fell, Zethkar witnessed something that would stay with him for the rest of his long life. The human army began to move, not in the chaotic rush he expected, but in a coordinated flow that seemed almost organic. Vehicles rolled out in precise intervals. Aircraft took off in coordinated waves, and soldiers marched with a rhythm that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. But it was the sound that truly unsettled him, or rather the lack of sound he expected. There were no war chants, no battle cries, no drums beating martial rhythms. Instead, there was something far more frightening. The steady, methodical sound of millions of humans walking in unison toward war. The sound was hypnotic and terrifying. It spoke of determination that ran deeper than mere aggression. It was the sound of a species that had decided something needed to be done, and would not be deterred by any force in the universe. "This is how we marched out of Africa 70,000 years ago," General Chen said quietly. "This is how we marched across continents, across oceans, and eventually across the stars. One step at a time, together." As transport ships began lifting off, carrying the first wave of human forces toward the contested systems, Zethkar felt a chill run through his body. He had come here expecting to witness a military parade, a show of force designed to impress allies and intimidate enemies. Instead, he had witnessed something far more profound and disturbing. He had seen an entire species transform itself into an instrument of war, not through rage or bloodlust, but through a collective decision that some lines could not be crossed. The hegemony had made a fundamental mistake. They had assumed that humans, being relatively new to the galactic stage, would respond to aggression the same way other species had. With fear, with calculation of odds, with eventual surrender when the cost became too high. They didn't understand that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history as persistence hunters. They didn't sprint after their prey and give up when it ran. They followed it relentlessly, step by step, until it collapsed from exhaustion. As the last transport disappeared into the star-filled sky, Zethkar realized he needed to send an urgent message to the Galactic Council, not about human military capabilities or tactical innovations, but about something far more important. He needed to warn them that humanity had just declared war not with weapons or words, but with the quiet, terrifying promise that they would never stop coming. The hegemony command ship Eternal Dominance floated in the void like a massive predator, its dark hull bristling with weapons that had shattered the defenses of 100 worlds. Supreme Commander Vexthul stood before the main view screen, his 6 arms folded across his armored chest as he reviewed the intelligence reports. "The humans are mobilizing their entire fleet," reported his tactical officer, a nervous scritch whose natural camouflage kept shifting colors with anxiety. "Every available ship, from their newest dreadnoughts to converted civilian vessels." Vexthul's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Desperation. They know they cannot match our firepower, so they throw everything they have at us in one final gambit." But even as he spoke those words, something nagged at him. The hegemony had conquered 47 different species over the past 3 centuries. Each victory followed the same pattern: overwhelming display of force, targeted strikes against key installations, and inevitable surrender when the defending species calculated the futility of resistance. The humans weren't following the pattern. "Show me their fleet composition," he commanded. The holographic display filled with data, and Vexthul's confidence wavered slightly. The human fleet was indeed massive, but its organization was unlike anything in hegemony tactical doctrine. Mixed formations of military and civilian ships, supply lines that seemed deliberately redundant, and a command structure that appeared almost chaotic. "They're spreading their forces too thin," observed his chief strategist. "No concentrated firepower, no proper battle formations. It's as if they don't understand basic military strategy." Vexthul studied the display more carefully. Something was wrong with this assessment, but he couldn't identify what. "Begin the assault. Target their primary military installations first, then their industrial centers. Standard conquest protocol." The first battle took place in the Centauri system, where a hegemony battle group encountered a human defense fleet. Vexthul watched the engagement through long-range sensors, expecting to see the familiar pattern of enemy ships retreating after the first exchange of fire. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The human ships didn't retreat. Even when outgunned and outmaneuvered, they continued fighting. Ships with failing shields rammed hegemony vessels. Damaged human fighters made suicide runs against capital ships. When their weapons failed, they used their ships themselves as weapons. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "the humans are broadcasting on all frequencies. It's not a surrender request." "What are they saying?" It appears to be some kind of counting, numbers in their various languages. They're counting their dead." Vexthul felt his blood chill. "Counting their dead? Why?" The answer came from the next battle, then the next. The humans weren't just fighting, they were keeping score. Every fallen soldier, every destroyed ship, every life lost was being cataloged and broadcast across their networks. They weren't mourning their losses or calculating the cost of continued resistance. They were keeping a debt ledger. After the fifth engagement, Vexthul began to understand the terrible truth. The humans weren't trying to win battles in any conventional sense. They were learning. Each engagement provided them with more data about hegemony tactics, weapons, and capabilities. They were treating their own casualties as an acceptable price for intelligence. Supreme Commander, his xenobiologist advisor, entered the command chamber, her tentacles writhing with agitation. I've completed my analysis of human cultural and historical data. You need to see this. The holographic display shifted to show human military history, images of ancient battlefields, recordings of historical conflicts, statistical analyses of human warfare patterns. They call it total war, the xenobiologist explained. When threatened with extinction, humans don't just commit their military forces. They transform their entire civilization into a weapon. Every factory becomes an armament plant. Every citizen becomes a potential soldier. Every resource is redirected toward the war effort. Vexthul studied the data with growing unease. This is inefficient. Surely their economy would collapse under such strain. That's what we thought, the xenobiologist replied. But look at this. The display showed human industrial output since the war began. Instead of declining, it was increasing exponentially. They're not just converting existing infrastructure, they're building new capacity faster than we're destroying it. Impossible. Our intelligence clearly showed their industrial limitations. Our intelligence was based on peacetime production, Supreme Commander. We never considered what they might be capable of when every human in their space commits to a single goal. The next piece of disturbing news came from the intelligence division. Human ships were appearing in systems where none should exist, using routes that weren't on any star charts. When questioned, captured human prisoners spoke of something called the Underground Railroad, a vast network of hidden supply lines and safe houses that had somehow materialized overnight. How are they managing this level of coordination? Vexthul demanded. Our communication networks are far superior to theirs. His intelligence chief, a former human ally who had joined the hegemony for protection, provided the answer with obvious reluctance. They're not using a centralized command structure like we are, Supreme Commander. They're using something they call emergent coordination. Every human unit, from the largest fleet to the smallest patrol, is given the same basic objective and trusted to figure out how to achieve it. That should create chaos and confusion. In most species, yes, but humans have something they call common sense and initiative. They don't need detailed orders. They see what needs to be done, and they do it. As the weeks passed, Vexthul watched his carefully planned conquest begin to unravel. Hegemony forces were still winning individual battles, but somehow they were losing the war. Human ships appeared where they shouldn't be. Supply lines were constantly under attack. Conquered worlds erupted in rebellion, just as hegemony forces moved on to the next target. The humans weren't fighting like a military organization. They were fighting like an immune system, with every part of their civilization working to reject the hegemony invasion. The breaking point came when Vexthul received a message from the Hegemony High Council. 3 other frontier campaigns had been suspended. Resources were being diverted to the human front. For the first time in hegemony history, a single species was requiring the full attention of their military machine. Supreme Commander, his aide approached cautiously. We've received another human transmission. It's different from the others. The main screen activated, showing the face of a human admiral. She was young by human standards, her uniform crisp despite obvious battle damage to her ship's bridge. Supreme Commander Vexthul, she said, speaking directly to the camera. I am Admiral Sarah Park of the Terran Defense Force. We know you're listening to these transmissions. We want you to know that we've learned everything we need to know about your tactics, your technology, and your strategy. Vexthul leaned forward, his confidence finally cracking. Phase 1 of our response is now complete, Admiral Park continued. We've analyzed your capabilities and adapted our defenses accordingly. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. We thought you should know. We're coming for you now. The transmission ended, leaving Vexthul staring at a blank screen. For the first time in his military career, he felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Captain Jira Voss of the Hegemony Third Fleet had conquered systems across half the galaxy. Her crystalline warrior race, the Shalturi, were bred for combat, enhanced with cybernetic implants and trained from birth to feel no fear. She had personally led the assault that broke the resilient Confederation and had stood victorious on the homeworld of the Iron Caste. Now she stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching human ships approach through the asteroid field of Sigma Draconis, and for the first time in her life, she felt something that might have been doubt. "They're not using standard attack formations," reported her tactical officer. "The ships are spreading out in what appears to be a random pattern." Jira studied the display with her enhanced vision, analyzing every detail. The human fleet was indeed scattered, seemingly without coordination. By all tactical doctrine, they should be easy prey for concentrated hegemony firepower. "Target the largest vessels first," she ordered. Standard engagement protocol. The hegemony plasma cannons fired, their brilliant energy beams reaching across space toward the human ships. But something impossible happened. The human vessels seemed to know exactly where the shots would be, moving just enough to avoid direct hits while maintaining their chaotic formation. "How are they predicting our targeting?" the tactical officer asked, confusion clear in his synthetic voice. Before Jira could answer, the human ships opened fire, but they weren't aiming at her fleet. Instead, their weapons struck specific asteroids in the field around them. The massive rocks exploded, sending debris flying in precisely calculated trajectories. "Incoming projectiles," the sensors officer announced unnecessarily. Jira could see the storm of rock and metal fragments approaching her formation, like a carefully orchestrated avalanche. Her ship's point defense systems engaged, destroying most of the debris, but the attack served its purpose. The hegemony formation was forced to break apart, separating into smaller groups to avoid the continuing asteroid strikes. That's when the real attack began. Human ships emerged from behind the remaining asteroids like predators that had been lying in wait. They moved with a coordination that seemed impossible given their scattered deployment. Each human vessel seemed to know exactly where every other ship would be, creating a web of crossfire that caught the separated hegemony ships in overlapping fields of destruction. They planned this, Jira realized aloud. The entire asteroid field is a weapon. Her flagship shuddered under the impact of human missiles, but she noticed something strange about the weapons. They weren't using standard explosive warheads. Instead, each missile seemed designed for a specific target. Some released electromagnetic pulses to disable systems, others deployed clouds of metallic particles to interfere with sensors, and still others carried what appeared to be boarding pods. "Captain," her security chief reported urgently, "we have intruders on deck 7 through 12. Impossible. Our shields are still functional. They didn't beam aboard, ma'am. They rode the missiles in." Jira felt her combat stimulants surge through her system as she processed this information. The humans had used their own weapons as delivery systems for boarding parties. It was either brilliant or completely insane. The battle that followed was unlike anything in Jira's experience. The human boarders didn't fight like conventional soldiers. They moved through her ship like they had studied the blueprints for months, heading directly for critical systems. When her security teams engaged them, the humans used tactics that seemed to violate every principle of shipboard combat. They turned the ship's own systems against the crew. Artificial gravity was manipulated to create weapon platforms. Atmospheric systems were used to deploy smokescreens and disorient defenders. Even the ship's automated cleaning systems were somehow reprogrammed to spray lubricants that made corridors impassable. "Captain," her chief engineer reported over the communication system, "they're not trying to capture or destroy our systems. They're studying them. Every piece of equipment they encounter is being scanned and analyzed. For what purpose? Unknown, but they're uploading data to some kind of portable devices." Through her enhanced hearing, Jira could hear the sound of human voices echoing through her ship's corridors. They weren't shouting battle cries or coordinating attacks. Instead, they were talking to each other in calm, conversational tones, sharing observations and discussing technical details like researchers conducting a field study. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The humans weren't trying to win this battle in any conventional sense. They were conducting the largest intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history, using live combat as their laboratory. "All units, withdraw from close combat," she ordered. "Maintain distance and use long-range weapons only." But the humans had anticipated this response. As her fleet pulled back, human ships throughout the system began broadcasting a signal that made her blood run cold. It was the sound of human laughter, transmitted across every communication frequency. "This is Commander Lisa Chen," a human voice announced over the general channel. "Thank you for the demonstration, Captain Voss. We've learned everything we needed to know about Shalturi combat doctrine, hegemony ship design, and your tactical response patterns." Jira's mandibles clicked in frustration. "How do you know my name?" "We've been monitoring hegemony communications for months. We know quite a bit about you, Captain. Your service record, your psychological profile, even your preferred combat stimulant mixture. You're predictable." The word hit Jira harder than any weapon. Predictable. Her entire career, her victories across dozens of worlds, all of it reduced to patterns that could be analyzed and countered. "You cannot defeat the hegemony through intelligence gathering alone," she transmitted back. "Superior firepower will always prevail." "Will it?" Commander Chen's voice carried what Jira was learning to recognize as human amusement. "Let me share something with you, Captain. While you've been fighting us here, human forces have simultaneously engaged hegemony fleets in 47 different systems. Every engagement has been recorded, analyzed, and shared across our entire military network in real time." The implications of this statement crashed over Jira like a tidal wave. The humans weren't conducting separate battles. They were conducting one massive experiment with the entire hegemony military as their test subjects. "Every battle teaches us more about your strengths and weaknesses," Commander Chen continued. "Every engagement reveals more about your technology and tactics. And unlike you, we share everything we learn instantly across our entire species." Jira watched as the human ships began to withdraw from the asteroid field, their mission apparently complete. They moved with the same strange coordination she had observed earlier, like individual cells of a single organism. "This isn't how warfare is supposed to work," she said, not realizing she was speaking over an open channel. "You're right," Commander Chen replied. "This isn't warfare as you understand it. This is problem-solving. You're not fighting an army, Captain Voss. You're fighting an entire species that has decided you're a problem that needs to be solved." As the human fleet disappeared into hyperspace, Jira was left staring at the debris field that had once been 3 of her ships. But the material losses weren't what troubled her. It was the growing realization that everything the hegemony thought they knew about warfare was becoming obsolete. The humans weren't playing by the established rules of galactic conflict. They were writing new rules and doing it faster than the hegemony could adapt. For the first time in her military career, Captain Jira Voss began to consider the possibility that her side might lose this war. Not because they lacked firepower or courage, but because they were fighting an enemy that treated war itself as just another problem to be analyzed, understood, and solved through methodical experimentation. The humans were learning faster than the hegemony could teach them. High Admiral Korath had lived for 6 centuries and commanded the hegemony's most elite strike force through wars that reshaped the galaxy. His species, the ancient Vorthok, possessed a collective memory that spanned millennia, allowing them to learn from battles fought by their ancestors. He was considered one of the finest military minds in known space. Standing in his private chamber aboard the super dreadnought Universal Truth, reviewing the latest intelligence reports, Korath felt something his people had not experienced in over 1,000 years: intellectual confusion. "The humans have done something impossible," he murmured to his aide, a younger Vorthok named Silvar. "They have changed the fundamental nature of warfare itself." Silvar approached with the latest battle analyses. "How so, High Admiral?" Korath activated the holographic display, showing the positions of hegemony and human forces across 17 sectors. "Look at this pattern. For 3 months, we have been winning every engagement. Our ships are superior, our weapons more powerful, our tactics proven across centuries of conquest. Yet somehow we are losing the war." The display showed what appeared to be a contradiction. Hegemony forces had achieved victory in every major battle, destroying human ships and capturing human-held positions. By every conventional measure, the war was going exactly as planned. But the strategic situation told a different story. The humans are not fighting to win battles, Korath continued. They are fighting to learn. Every defeat teaches them something new. Every victory we achieve makes them stronger. Silvar studied the data with growing unease. But surely there are limits to what they can learn. Our technology is centuries ahead of theirs. That's what I thought, Korath replied grimly. Watch this. The display shifted to show the technological progression of human weapons over the past 3 months. Silvar watched in amazement as human weapon designs evolved in real time, becoming more sophisticated with each engagement. Ships that had been destroyed in early battles were replaced by vessels that incorporated countermeasures for the exact weapons that had destroyed their predecessors. They're not just learning our tactics, Korath explained. They're reverse engineering our technology from battlefield wreckage and adapting it to their own designs. But faster than should be possible. How fast? They implemented effective countermeasures to our plasma cannon technology within 2 weeks of first encountering it. Our own research division took 50 years to develop those weapons. Silvar felt his confidence begin to waver. Perhaps they had help from other species. No, Korath said flatly. I've analyzed their approach carefully. This is purely human innovation. They have something we don't. What? They're not afraid to fail. Korath called up recordings from captured human communications. Silvar listened as human commanders discussed their losses not with despair or frustration, but with scientific curiosity. They analyzed their failures like researchers studying experimental data, extracting useful information from every defeat. Listen to this. Korath highlighted a particular recording. A human captain was reporting the destruction of her ship, but her tone was almost enthusiastic as she described what she had learned about hegemony shield frequencies before her vessel was destroyed. She sounds excited about being defeated, Silvar observed with bewilderment. Because to humans, every defeat is data. Every loss is a lesson. They treat warfare like an experimental science, and they're willing to sacrifice anything to learn what they need to know. The truth of this became clear in the next phase of the war. Human attacks became increasingly sophisticated, targeting not just hegemony ships but the specific weaknesses those ships had revealed in previous battles. It was as if the humans had built a detailed technical manual for every hegemony vessel, simply by watching them fight. But it was their approach to prisoners that truly unsettled Korath. Unlike other species, who interrogated captives for strategic information, humans seemed more interested in understanding how hegemony soldiers thought. They asked questions about training methods, decision-making processes, and psychological motivations. They're not trying to learn our secrets, he realized. They're trying to learn how we think. This suspicion was confirmed when human forces began predicting hegemony movements with uncanny accuracy. Battle plans that should have been completely unpredictable were somehow anticipated and countered before they could be implemented. Sir, his intelligence officer reported urgently, we've discovered something disturbing about human information. Processing. Show me. We intercepted human military communications and found that they're not using a centralized command structure like we assumed. Instead, they're sharing all combat data instantly across their entire military network. Every lesson learned by one unit is immediately available to all units. Korath studied the data flow charts with growing alarm. This is impossible. The processing requirements alone would overwhelm any known computer system. That's the disturbing part, sir. They're not using computer systems. They're using their soldiers as biological processing nodes. Every human in their military is simultaneously a warrior, a researcher, and a data analyst. You're saying their entire army is a single distributed intelligence? That appears to be correct, sir. Korath felt his understanding of the war shift fundamentally. The hegemony wasn't fighting an army in any conventional sense. They were fighting a single, vast organism that could think, learn, and adapt faster than any biological or artificial intelligence in known space. The full implications became clear when he reviewed the latest casualty reports. Human losses were declining steadily, not because they were avoiding combat, but because they were becoming more efficient at achieving their objectives with minimal cost. They had learned to fight the hegemony's style of war better than the hegemony itself. Hi, Admiral, Silvar asked quietly. What happens when they finish learning everything they need to know? Before Korath could answer, an alert sounded throughout the ship. His communications officer announced an incoming transmission from human forces. The holographic display activated, showing the face of a human admiral. She was older than the previous human commanders they had encountered, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom despite her species' short lifespan. "Hi, Admiral Korath," she said formally. "I am Admiral Elena Vasquez of the Terran Strategic Command. We've been monitoring your communications and understand that you've figured out what we've been doing." Korath straightened. "You've been using this entire war as a learning exercise." "Exactly. And now that exercise is complete. We understand your technology, your tactics, your psychology, and your strategic doctrine better than you do yourselves." "Impossible." "Is it?" Admiral Vasquez smiled, and something in that expression made Korath's blood run cold. "Tell me, High Admiral, in your 6 centuries of life, how many different species have you fought?" 47, he answered automatically. "And how many different approaches to warfare have you encountered?" Korath paused, beginning to understand. 47. Each species fought in their own way, according to their own nature and capabilities. You learned to defeat each of them by studying their particular strengths and weaknesses. But tell me, in all those centuries, did any of them ever learn to fight like a completely different species? The question hit Korath like a physical blow. No. That's because every other species fights according to their nature. The Shalturi fight like crystals, hard, precise, but brittle. The Vorthak fight like time itself, patient, methodical, inevitable. But humans don't fight like humans. What do you mean? We fight like whatever we need to fight like. We've spent the last 3 months learning to be 47 different species. And now, High Admiral, we're going to show you what happens when one species can fight like all species at once. The transmission ended, leaving Korath staring at a blank screen. For the first time in his long life, he began to understand why the galaxy feared humanity. They weren't just another species with their own approach to warfare. They were a species that could master any approach to warfare they encountered, and then combine them in ways that no one had ever imagined possible. The Hegemony War Council convened in the Grand Chamber of Eternal Dominance, a gathering that had not been called in over 2 centuries. Representatives from every major species in the hegemony attended, their faces reflecting the growing concern that had spread throughout their territories. Supreme Commander Vexthul stood before the assembled leaders, his confidence shaken but his resolve intact. Around the circular chamber sat the most powerful beings in known space, the hive mind collective of the Zerathi, the cybernetic overlords of the Machine Syndicate, the psychic ruling caste of the Mentari, and dozens of other species who had sworn allegiance to hegemony supremacy. "The human situation has become complicated," Vexthul began, his words carefully chosen. "They have proven more adaptable than our initial assessment suggested." Overlord Prime X7439 of the Machine Syndicate spoke first, its synthetic voice cutting through the chamber's atmosphere like a blade. "Adaptation implies evolution within expected parameters. What we have observed transcends adaptation. The humans have achieved tactical metamorphosis." The Zerathi collective responded with a unified voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Our networked consciousness has analyzed human combat patterns across 4,147 separate engagements. They display learning acceleration that should be biologically impossible for an individual-based species." High Sion Veltara of the Mentari leaned forward, her mental emanations touching the minds of everyone present. "I have attempted to read human prisoners' thoughts during interrogation. What I found disturbs me more than their resistance to psychic intrusion." "Explain," Vexthul commanded. "Their minds are linked, Supreme Commander, not through technology or psychic ability, but through something far more profound. They share a conceptual framework that allows them to think as both individuals and as a collective simultaneously. When one human learns something, the knowledge becomes available to all humans through cultural transmission mechanisms we don't fully understand." The implications of this statement sent ripples of unease through the chamber. The hegemony's power had always been based on the principle that individual species could be conquered by exploiting their specific weaknesses. But the humans seemed to have no fixed weaknesses. They adapted too quickly for any vulnerability to remain exploitable. "What are our current losses?" asked the representative of the Korath Empire, a species known for their practical approach to warfare. Vexthul activated the holographic display, showing casualty figures that made several council members recoil. Direct military losses remain within acceptable parameters. However, strategic losses are significant. The display showed something unprecedented in hegemony history: retreat patterns. Red markers indicated systems where hegemony forces had been forced to withdraw, not due to superior enemy firepower, but due to what human commanders called tactical obsolescence. They've made our conventional tactics useless, Vexthul continued. Every standard approach we've tried has been analyzed, countered, and turned against us. They fight us with our own strategies, but improved. Impossible, declared War Chief Grazatok of the Savage Clans. No species can master the combat arts of the Savage Clans. We have trained for millennia to perfect our berserker techniques. Show him recording. Delta 447, Vexthul ordered. The holographic display shifted to show footage from a recent battle. Human soldiers charged across an open battlefield, but their attack wasn't the chaotic rush typical of their species. Instead, they moved with the precise fury of Savage Clan berserkers, their battle cries echoing the ancient war songs of Graztok's people. But there was something wrong with the image. The humans weren't just copying Savage Clan tactics. They were performing them better than the Savage Clans themselves. They studied our berserker techniques and improved them, Vexthul explained as Graztok watched in stunned silence. They removed the weaknesses while keeping the strengths. Your own warriors were defeated by humans fighting like idealized versions of themselves. Similar recordings followed, humans fighting with the crystalline precision of the Shalturi, but with added flexibility. Humans using Vorthak patience and timing, but with improved efficiency. Humans employing Mentari psychic warfare techniques using purely technological means. They're not just learning to fight like us, High Scion Veltara whispered, her mental emanations filled with something approaching awe. They're learning to fight like better versions of us. The most disturbing revelation came from the intelligence reports. Human forces had begun recruiting defectors from hegemony species, not through coercion or bribery, but through something far more effective: inspiration. They're showing our own people what they could become, reported Intelligence Director Kixtel. Humans don't promise power or wealth to potential defectors. They promise improvement. They show members of our species enhanced versions of their own cultures and capabilities. Overlord Prime X7439 processed this information with visible confusion. Define enhanced versions. They take what's best about each species and combine it with human innovation. They've created Shalturi crystal technology that's more flexible, Vorthak memory storage that's more efficient, and Zerathi networking that's more secure. They're not trying to replace our species' capabilities, they're trying to perfect them. The silence that followed this statement was deafening. Every species in the chamber had spent millennia believing that their own approach to existence was optimal. The idea that another species could not only learn their methods but improve upon them was fundamentally threatening to their identity. How is this possible? Demanded the Korath representative. They're barely out of their home system. They lack our experience, our technology, our understanding. That may be exactly why they can do this, High Scion Veltara replied thoughtfully. We are constrained by our own perfection. We've spent so long optimizing our approaches that we've lost the ability to fundamentally change them. Humans have no such constraints. They approach everything as if it could be improved. The true scope of the human threat became clear when Vexthul revealed the latest intelligence about human manufacturing capacity. The display showed production figures that defied every economic model in hegemony databases. They've increased their industrial output by 2,147% since the war began, he announced. But they haven't done this by working harder or longer. They've done it by working smarter. Explain. They've studied every industrial technique used by every hegemony species and combined them into hybrid systems that are more efficient than anything we've ever developed. They're building ships using Korath engineering principles, Shalturi material science, Vorthak quality control, and machine syndicate automation, all integrated into unified production systems. The assembled leaders began to understand the true nature of what they faced. The humans weren't just another enemy to be defeated. They were a catalytic force that could take any existing system and make it better. What do you recommend, Supreme Commander? Asked the Zerathi collective. Vexthul was quiet for a long moment before answering. We have two options. The first is to escalate the conflict beyond conventional warfare. Deploy planet killers, eliminate human worlds entirely, except massive collateral damage. And the second option? We negotiate. The suggestion sent shockwaves through the chamber. The hegemony had never negotiated with any species as an equal. Their entire identity was built on the principle of absolute dominance. The humans have sent us a message, Vexthul continued. They're willing to discuss terms but not surrender. They want to talk about what they call mutual improvement, meaning they want to teach us how to be better at being ourselves. As the War Council digested this unprecedented situation, each species began to grapple with a question that challenged their fundamental understanding of the universe. What happens when the thing you're fighting isn't trying to destroy you, but to improve you? For the first time in hegemony history, they were facing an enemy that might be more dangerous in peace than in war. The neutral station convergence point floated in the void between human and hegemony space, a massive structure built by the ancient builders before they had vanished into the cosmic deep. Its halls had witnessed treaties that reshaped galaxies and negotiations that prevented wars that could have extinguished civilizations. Ambassador Zethkar stood in the observation deck, watching human and hegemony ships maintain their positions around the station. The careful spacing between the fleets spoke of mutual respect earned through blood and battle. He had requested to witness these negotiations, knowing that what happened here would determine the future of galactic civilization. Ambassador, a voice said behind him. He turned to see Admiral Elena Vasquez approaching, her uniform bearing the insignia of the Terran Strategic Command. Thank you for agreeing to observe these proceedings. I confess, Admiral, I am curious to see how your species conducts diplomacy. Your approach to warfare has been unconventional. Admiral Vasquez smiled. You might say we approach everything unconventionally. That's what makes us useful. They were joined by Supreme Commander Vexthul, who moved with the careful dignity of a leader who had learned to respect his opponents. The three beings represented different approaches to existence. Zethkar's measured observation, Vexthul's hierarchical authority, and Vasquez's adaptive pragmatism. Shall we begin? Vexthul asked formally. The main conference chamber was a marvel of neutral design, created to accommodate representatives from hundreds of different species. Today it hosted the most important gathering in recent galactic history. Around the circular table sat the leadership of both sides, human admirals and generals alongside hegemony war chiefs and overlords. But as Zethkar observed the proceedings, he realized that something unprecedented was happening. This wasn't a negotiation in any conventional sense. It was a collaborative problem-solving session. The fundamental issue, Admiral Vasquez began, is that both of our civilizations are trapped in suboptimal patterns. The hegemony has achieved stability through conquest and control, but at the cost of innovation and growth. Humanity has achieved innovation and growth, but we lack the organizational experience to manage galactic-scale civilization. Supreme Commander Vexthul's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. You're suggesting cooperation rather than dominance. I'm suggesting evolution, Vasquez replied. Not biological evolution, but civilizational evolution. The combination of hegemony experience and human adaptability could create something better than either of us could achieve alone. The hegemony representatives exchanged glances. This was far from the surrender demands they had expected. What exactly are you proposing? Asked Overlord Prime X7439. Admiral Vasquez activated a holographic display that showed a complex organizational chart. We call it the synthesis protocol. A gradual integration of human and hegemony, systems that preserves the best elements of both civilizations while eliminating the inefficiencies. The display showed detailed plans for everything from military organization to economic systems. Zethkar studied the proposals with growing amazement. The humans weren't trying to impose their system on the hegemony. Instead, they were suggesting hybrid approaches that seemed to optimize the strengths of both civilizations. You want to reorganize the galaxy, High Scion Veltara observed. We want to improve the galaxy, Vasquez corrected. Look at these efficiency projections. Combined human innovation with hegemony infrastructure could increase overall productive capacity by orders of magnitude. More importantly, it could do so while reducing resource conflicts and territorial disputes. How? Demanded War Chief Graztok. By making expansion and improvement more efficient than conquest, replied Admiral Park, who had joined the conference virtually from the front lines. When it's easier to build new worlds than to take existing ones, the motivation for aggressive expansion disappears. The negotiations continued for hours, with human representatives presenting detailed analyses of how different aspects of hegemony civilization could be enhanced. They showed how Shalturi crystal technology could be made more flexible, how Vorthic memory systems could be made more efficient, how machine syndicate automation could be made more creative. But what impressed Zethkar most was what the humans didn't propose. They never suggested that any hegemony species abandon their fundamental nature or adopt human characteristics. Instead, they suggested ways each species could become better versions of themselves. This is manipulation, the Zerathi Collective finally stated. You seek to control us through improvement rather than force. Admiral Vasquez nodded calmly. That's correct. We've learned that willing cooperation produces better results than coercion. But it's not manipulation in any deceptive sense. We're being completely transparent about our intentions, which are to create a galactic civilization that's more efficient, more productive, more stable, and more innovative than anything that has ever existed. We want to build something that our children and your children can be proud to inherit. And if we refuse? Supreme Commander Vexthul asked. Then we continue the war. Vasquez replied matter-of-factly. We've learned everything we need to know about your capabilities. Phase 3 of our military response will begin immediately, and it will be far more effective than anything you've seen so far. The threat was delivered without hostility or emotion, making it somehow more convincing than any amount of bluster would have been. But that would be wasteful, she continued. Both sides would suffer casualties and resource losses that could be avoided. More importantly, it would delay the improvements we could make to galactic civilization by decades or centuries. High Scion Veltara leaned forward. You speak of galactic civilization as if it's a project to be optimized, isn't it? Admiral Vasquez asked. Every civilization is a work in progress. The question is whether we work on it deliberately and cooperatively, or whether we let random forces and conflicts shape it accidentally. The negotiations reached a turning point when Overlord Prime X7439 posed a critical question. What guarantees do we have that humans won't eventually seek to dominate this hybrid civilization? None, Vasquez admitted. Just as we have no guarantees that you won't, but that's why the synthesis protocol includes built-in safeguards against any single species or group achieving absolute control. She displayed a complex governance structure that distributed power across multiple species and organizations. No one gets to be in charge because everyone gets to be in charge of something they're particularly good at. As the discussions continued, Zethkar began to understand what he was witnessing. The humans had achieved something that no species in galactic history had ever accomplished. They had made cooperation more attractive than conquest. They had studied the hegemony so thoroughly that they could offer each member species something better than what they already had. Not through replacement, but through enhancement. There's one thing I don't understand, Zethkar interjected during a break in the formal proceedings. Why are you offering this? You've demonstrated that you can defeat the hegemony militarily. Why not simply impose your will? Admiral Vasquez considered the question carefully. Because winning a war and building a civilization are completely different challenges. We're good at learning and adapting, but we lack the deep experience in galactic governance that the hegemony has developed over centuries. So you need us. We need each other, she corrected. Humans alone could probably dominate the galaxy eventually, but it would take us much longer to create something stable and lasting. The hegemony alone has stability but has stagnated. Together we could build something that's both stable and progressive. As the formal negotiations concluded, Zethkar reflected on what he had witnessed. The humans had fundamentally changed the nature of galactic politics. They had shown that it was possible to win through offering improvement rather than threatening destruction. But perhaps more importantly, they had demonstrated that the galaxy's greatest enemy wasn't any particular species or empire. It was the assumption that civilizational progress required conflict and domination. The humans had marched to war not to destroy their enemies, but to prove that there was a better way for everyone to exist. And in doing so, they had won the most complete victory in galactic history. They had made their enemies want to become their partners. 5 years after the synthesis accords were signed, Ambassador Zethkar stood once again on an observation deck, but this time he was aboard the New Horizons, a ship that embodied everything the galaxy had become under the human-led transformation. The vessel itself was a marvel of collaborative engineering. Its hull was built using refined Shalturi crystal technology that could adapt its properties based on environmental conditions. Its power systems combined Korath engineering with machine syndicate automation, creating efficiency levels that neither species had achieved alone. The navigation systems used Vorthak memory storage enhanced with human intuitive interfaces, while the communication networks employed Zerathi collective processing principles improved with human individual creativity protocols. But it was the crew that truly amazed him. Ambassador. Captain Sarah Kim approached, her uniform bearing insignia that would have been impossible before the synthesis. She was human, but her second-in-command was a Shalturi crystal being. Her chief engineer was a machine syndicate construct, and her strategic advisor was a Vorthak memory keeper. Captain, Zethkar acknowledged, I must admit I never expected to see such integration possible. Neither did we, Captain Kim replied honestly. But the humans had a saying, diversity is strength. It took us a while to understand what that really meant. Through the observation windows, Zethkar could see their destination, New Geneva Station, the first truly integrated colony in galactic history. The station itself was a testament to what the synthesis protocol had achieved. Sections built with different species' architectural principles were seamlessly connected, creating a structure that was both functionally efficient and aesthetically beautiful in ways that no single species could have achieved. How many species are represented there now? Zethkar asked. 47 different species, Captain Kim replied with obvious pride. Not just hegemony species either. Word has spread throughout the galaxy about what we're building here. Species from the Outer Rim, the Dark Zone, even some of the isolationist civilizations have sent representatives. As their ship approached the station, Zethkar could see the evidence of the transformation everywhere. Ships of different species traveled together in mixed formations. Trade vessels carried goods designed by one species and manufactured by another. Scientific vessels crewed by multiple species were heading out to explore regions of space that had been too dangerous for any single civilization to investigate alone. The economic reports are remarkable, Zethkar observed. Productivity across all participating systems has increased by over 300%. That's just the beginning, Captain Kim replied. Admiral Vasquez says we're still in the early stages of optimization. The real improvements will come when the children who grew up in integrated communities start reaching positions of responsibility. This was perhaps the most profound change the humans had brought about. Children from different species were growing up together, learning from each other's strengths and perspectives. Young Shalturi were developing human-like adaptability while retaining their crystalline precision. Human children were learning Vorthak patience and long-term thinking. Machine syndicate constructs were incorporating biological creativity into their programming. There's something I've been meaning to ask, Zethkar said as they docked with the station. Why did the humans choose to share leadership of the synthesis rather than maintaining control? They could have used their advantages to dominate. Captain Kim was quiet for a moment. Because domination wasn't the goal. Improvement was. And you can't improve something by controlling it. You improve it by understanding it, optimizing it, and then letting it grow beyond what you originally imagined. The tour of New Geneva Station that followed was unlike anything Zethkar had experienced. Research laboratories where human creativity sparked new discoveries in Mentari psychic sciences. Manufacturing facilities where Korath precision was enhanced by machine syndicate automation and human innovation. Cultural centers where the art and music of dozens of species blended into forms of expression that no one had imagined possible, but it was the conversation he had with a group of mixed species students that truly illustrated how much had changed. The old way of thinking was that each species had to be the best at something, explained Maria Santos, a human teenager who was studying advanced crystal engineering from Shalturi masters. But that meant everyone else had to be worse at those things. Now we understand that everyone can be better at everything, added her study partner, a young Shalturi named Krikstal, who spoke with an enthusiasm that would have been impossible for his species before human influence. We don't have to choose between being ourselves and being excellent. Their teacher, a Vorthak elder named Temrath, nodded approvingly. The humans taught us that identity and improvement are not contradictory concepts. You can become better while becoming more yourself, not less. The transformation wasn't limited to technology and economics. The very nature of interspecies relations had evolved. Conflicts that would have once led to wars were now treated as optimization problems to be solved collaboratively. The galaxy's first truly integrated conflict resolution system had emerged, based on human problem-solving principles enhanced by the wisdom and experience of older civilizations. We've had 17 potential conflicts this year, Admiral Vasquez explained during a briefing Zethkar attended. All of them were resolved through collaborative analysis and improvement rather than force. How? Zethkar asked. By treating every conflict as a design flaw in the larger system, she replied. When two groups want the same resource, we figure out how to create more of that resource or find alternatives that meet everyone's needs. When two cultures clash, we find ways for them to enhance each other rather than compete. The briefing included reports from across the integrated territories, agricultural worlds where human innovation had increased crop yields using Korath soil management and Zerathi environmental monitoring, research stations where combined scientific approaches were making breakthroughs at unprecedented rates, defense installations where the hybrid military doctrine was proving so effective that potential aggressive neighbors were choosing to join the synthesis rather than fight it. The most remarkable thing, Admiral Vasquez continued, is that we're not expanding through conquest or even traditional colonization. We're expanding through invitation. Species are asking to join us because they can see the improvements we offer. As his visit continued, Zethkar began to understand the true scope of what the humans had accomplished. They hadn't just won a war or negotiated a peace treaty. They had fundamentally changed the operating principles of galactic civilization. The old model had been based on competition, where one species' success required another's failure. The new model was based on collaboration, where everyone's success enhanced everyone else's potential. On his final day at New Geneva Station, Zethkar attended a ceremony he could never have imagined 5 years earlier. A joint memorial service for those who had died in the war between humans and the hegemony, but instead of mourning enemies, they were honoring teachers. Every person who died in that conflict taught us something important, Admiral Vasquez said in her address to the mixed species gathering. Hegemony casualties taught us about courage, honor, and dedication to principles. Human casualties taught us about adaptability, sacrifice, and hope for the future. Their deaths weren't meaningless if we use what they taught us to build something better. Supreme Commander Vexthol, now serving as Director of Integrated Defense Systems, spoke next. The humans came to us as enemies and made us into partners. They studied our strengths and weaknesses not to exploit them, but to enhance them. They have given us something we didn't know we needed, the ability to become better versions of ourselves. As Zethkar prepared to return to his own homeworld, he reflected on what he had witnessed. The humans had indeed marched to war, but their ultimate weapon hadn't been superior firepower or advanced technology. It had been their ability to see potential where others saw only problems, and to offer improvement where others offered only domination. They had achieved the most complete victory in galactic history, not by destroying their enemies, but by making their enemies grateful to have met them. And in doing so, they had proven that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't the ability to destroy, but the ability to improve. They had shown that true strength came not from being feared, but from being indispensable. The galaxy would never again fear humanity's march to war. Instead, it would eagerly await humanity's march toward whatever came next, knowing that they would somehow make it better than anyone had ever imagined possible. The humans had won not just a war, but the future itself.